When we look closely at human behavior, you've seen this moment before. Someone hurts you. Maybe it's something small, a dismissive comment, a broken promise, a tone that cuts deeper than the words themselves. You pause. You wait. Not for revenge, not for drama, just for something simple, a sentence. I'm sorry, but it never comes. Instead, you get silence, or excuses, or worse, they act as if nothing happened. Stop for a moment and remember how that feels in your body. Notice the subtle holding of your breath, the tension in your jaw. That is your nervous system trying to process a rupture in real time. And after a while, overthinking psychology takes over, and you start questioning your own perception. Maybe I'm exaggerating. Maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I'm asking for too much. But here's the psychological truth most people never say out loud. For some people, apologizing doesn't feel like a small act of accountability. It feels like psychological annihilation. Let's be honest. To apologize, a person has to do something incredibly uncomfortable. They have to admit that their subconscious mind's internal story about themselves might be wrong, that they are not always the reasonable one, not always the victim, not always the good person in the narrative. And for many minds, that realization triggers something deep in the nervous system. Existential threat. If this already resonates with you, subscribe. Here we dive deep without anesthesia, because the behavior you see, the refusal to say I'm sorry, often isn't about the mistake itself. It's about protecting a fragile internal identity. The ego in psychology is not just arrogance. It's a psychological shield, a structure that keeps a person's sense of self from collapsing under shame. And when that shield is weak, it becomes rigid. This is why some people would rather lose relationships than admit fault. Their nervous system treats accountability like danger. The amygdala, the brain's threat detector, activates. Cortisol rises. The body enters defense mode. Fight, deflect, deny, rewrite the story. Suddenly the conversation shifts. You're too sensitive. That's not what happened. You're twisting things. And now, something strange occurs. The person who is hurt becomes the one defending reality. The point is, a sincere apology requires emotional intelligence and regulation. It requires a nervous system capable of tolerating shame without collapsing. And many people were never taught how to do that, especially those who grew up in environments where mistakes were punished, mocked, or weaponized. In those environments, admitting fault didn't lead to repair. It led to humiliation. So the brain learned a survival rule. Never admit you're wrong. Ever. And decades later, that dark psychology is still running silently in the background of their relationships. They are essentially sacrificing connection to by a temporary feeling of safety. But here's the twist most people miss. Not everyone who refuses to apologize is the same. In fact, psychology facts reveal that there are very different types of people who struggle with apologizing. Each one is driven by a completely different emotional mechanism. Some are protecting a fragile ego. Some are avoiding unbearable shame. Some are repeating childhood survival strategies. And some are doing it deliberately for power and control. Type 1 might surprise you the most, because on the surface, they look confident. But psychologically, they are the most fragile of them all, the fragile ego protector. This person appears strong. They speak with certainty. They rarely hesitate to defend their position. But their confidence is defensive confidence. Psychologically, their identity depends on maintaining one core belief: I am not wrong. Because deep underneath, they learned early in life that if they are wrong, they lose value. They equate a single mistake with being a fundamentally flawed human being. When someone confronts them with a mistake, their brain doesn't interpret it as feedback. It interprets it as an attack. And once the brain detects an attack, the body moves into defense to avoid the one sentence that would expose the wound underneath. They will burn down a bridge just to avoid looking at the cracks in their own armor. Type 2 is very different. This person doesn't defend themselves loudly. They don't argue much. Instead, they disappear emotionally the moment accountability enters the room. The emotional avoider. You bring up the issue, and suddenly the conversation becomes strangely empty. They go quiet. They change the topic. It's like speaking to someone whose nervous system just pulled the emergency brake. The fragile ego protector fights shame, but the emotional avoider escapes it. For them, emotional confrontation feels like overload. Their nervous system exits the window of tolerance almost instantly. The body becomes quiet. The mind disconnects. Words disappear. They are not giving you the silent treatment to punish you. They are dissociating because the internal emotional volume is too loud to process. But the result for you is exactly the same: an empty room where repair should be. Which of these types do you recognize so far? Comment below. This self-recognition organizes you from the inside out. Type 3 does something far more destabilizing: the narcissistic rewriter. You enter the conversation believing you are discussing a specific event. But as the discussion unfolds, the narrative begins to shift. What are you talking about? That's not what happened. This is where relationship psychology often encounters subtle gaslighting. The narcissistic rewriter protects their identity, not by avoiding conflict, but by controlling the narrative of reality itself. Admitting fault would disrupt their rigid story of being the victim or the reasonable one. The original issue disappears, and now the conversation is about your tone, your timing, your sensitivity. They don't just refuse to take the blame, they hand it back to you. You walk away feeling exhausted, doubting your own memory, carrying the weight of a mistake you didn't even make. Type 4 carries one of the most complex psychological histories of all: the childhood survivor. From the outside, their refusal to apologize can look cold or stubborn. But internally, the problem is not ego. It's emotional conditioning. Many of these individuals grew up in environments where emotional safety simply didn't exist. Apologizing wasn't a bridge. It was a confession that could be used against you. The brain remembers. The body stores these experiences as patterns. Admitting fault activates old emotional danger signals. They care, and they often feel intense guilt privately. But they never learned how to move through the emotional territory where apologies live. They are still guarding a locked room inside themselves, terrified that if they let you see their flaws, you will leave. And then there is type 5, the most intentional, the most strategic, the power controller. This is the rarest type, but the dynamic is unmistakable. They refuse to apologize deliberately. For them, accountability is not an emotional issue. It's a power equation, a classic element of toxic personality traits. They know apologies redistribute power and create mutual recognition. They avoid this balance at all costs to maintain the emotional hierarchy. If they apologize, they fear losing leverage. The conflict disappears without them ever taking responsibility, leaving you with emotional fatigue. They trade genuine intimacy for untouchable superiority. Why does apologizing matter so much in human relationships? Because an apology is not just a sentence. It's a signal. A signal that the relationship matters more than the ego. A signal that reality can be shared instead of defended. Without that signal, trust begins to disappear. Because trust isn't built on a flawless record. It is built on the messy, courageous act of returning to each other after a rupture. People who cannot apologize often carry unresolved emotional structures. But understanding the psychology behind their behavior does not mean accepting the damage it causes. Compassion and boundaries can exist at the same time. You can understand someone's nervous system, still decide your emotional well-being deserves relationships where repair is possible. You are not abandoning them by requiring accountability. You are protecting your own psychological baseline. If you've ever felt confused or destabilized by someone who could never say those words, you are not asking for too much. You are asking for emotional maturity. What do you do with intimacy when it finally demands accountability? If this reflection helped you see your own psychological reality without guilt, share it with someone who lives in emotional survival mode. And of course, hit subscribe. Psychology Unseen is not a channel, it is a mindset.